From the News Channel 5 Network, this is OpenLine.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to OpenLine. Glad you're with us tonight. Very interesting topic. We're talking about anti-Semitism. Is anti-Semitism on the rise in the United States? And a recent survey indicates many Jews feel that it is, but many in the general public see things differently. So that's kind of a fascinating divergence there. And we want to talk about that. We want to talk about anti-Semitism, what may be happening out there, and what's fueling this perception on both sides. Happy to have with us the CEO of the Jewish Federation and Jewish Foundation of Nashville and Middle Tennessee, Eric Stillman, joining us via Zoom. Thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
So, all right. Anti-Semitism, this survey, I'm fascinated by the survey. But let me ask you, as CEO of the Jewish Federation, Jewish Foundation, what are you seeing? What are we seeing in Middle Tennessee, in your opinion? Is anti-Semitism on the rise, or what would you say?
It is, and we have statistical evidence for this, both through our local Jewish federations, on a statewide basis, data collected on behalf of the state, as well as data collected by the Anti-Defamation League, or the ADL, all demonstrate we are in a situation where there is this increase, and it is not just a matter of opinion, it's a fact. And
so how is it defined? How do we, when we say it's on the rise, anti-Semitism is on the rise, how do you define that? What do you mean?
So there's actually there are definitions that one can follow. The matter is when an action occurs, whether it is a sign or message that's spray painted on a building or a post on social media. There are folks who make a living on the sheer definition of what constitutes anti-Semitism, and some of it does require a certain degree of parsing it out to say, well, is that anti-Semitism, or is it just somebody's strongly held belief?
And so what do you think is fueling this recent increase?
So unfortunately, we've got a few factors. There certainly is a greater amount of division within our country. And so unfortunately, as our country has become more divided, there's been more negativity, more hatred has been expressed toward others, people who are unhappy with other people who they wish to blame for their lot in life. We also have, unfortunately, international actors who are involved as well, and there's a concerted effort through the boycott, divestment, and sanction movement against Israel and against the Jewish people, coming from folks who have a bias against Israel and Judaism. And unfortunately, there are people who just up until a few years ago would keep these opinions to themselves, and now they feel that it's more sort of free, open season, and they can express their points of view no matter how offensive it might be to other people.
Would you say the majority of what's out there, is it negative words or comments, or is it actual violence? Is it something that they're seeing on social media, or just, some terrible word said, or is there actual violence that you're seeing?
So unfortunately, there has been actual violence. In fact, just in the most recent few years, we saw the worst act of anti-Semitic violence ever in the history of the United States was the attack in Pittsburgh, a mass attack, a murder of 11 Jewish worshipers in their house of worship in Pittsburgh, who were attacked and killed by a gunman, and that person was fueled by anti-Semitic motivation. And so there's that situation. There was a killing of a congregant next to a rabbi in California. Those occurred in 2018, 2019. Then there were a series of attacks, physical attacks, that happened in Jersey City, New Jersey, and Muncie, New York in late 2019 into early 2020. And those are sort of severe examples. Unfortunately, there are other examples which do occur, and those physical attacks are sometimes covered in the media, sometimes not. And not only are they sometimes covered in the media, they're sometimes only covered in media that's of particular Jewish interest media and aren't necessarily picked up by mainstream media. And so therefore, it doesn't necessarily reach as broad an audience.
It doesn't maybe reach the whole public. And that brings us to what we're discussing here, this recent survey. And I want you to kind of get into that. I want to drill down in a moment into what we're seeing here in Middle Tennessee as far as anti-Semitism. But now let's pull back and talk about this survey, which I find fascinating. It was a national survey, and it asked people, is anti-Semitism on the rise? And Jews indicated overwhelmingly that it is on the rise, while the general public didn't see it that way. Is that right? And I guess characterize it in your words, if you could.
Well, Ben, I think you described it very well, and the way I would indicate the gap or the difference is one of awareness and education. The statistics, it was about, roughly speaking, almost twice as high a percentage among Jewish Americans as compared to the general population who perceived that anti-Semitism has increased over the last 5 years. And interestingly, of the percentage of the general population compared to the Jewish population was, again, more than double those who perceived that anti-Semitism had actually decreased over these same 5 years. So that divergence, I think, is a reflection of the fact that there's an opportunity, an educational opportunity here, because if people don't know that something is happening, if they're not reading about it online or not listening to it on the news, then they may not be aware of it, because in their own circles of friends and neighbors and business associates, they may not be hearing about it.
Yeah, we all are in our bubbles, I guess, and we don't sometimes see beyond that. And so this is the perfect example. We could use this example for more than just this one issue. But I think it illustrates a lot, but this issue is perfect to illustrate it. And so why is it important that we have this better understanding, in your opinion?
Ben, I believe that if we as a country are going to heal the differences and the divisions in our society and learn how to respect each other's differences and agree to disagree in an agreeable fashion, essentially, it is going to require us to have a better appreciation for who the other is. And I'm not asking anybody to change religions or change their ethnicity or their identification of who they are. Having a little bit more education, though, about who the other people are in our society, I think would go a long way toward helping to lower down the temperature and to increase the degree of understanding that people can have for one another.
And I mean, we like to check off boxes. We like to think, okay, we've solved one problem, let's go to other problems that we have to solve. And do you think that I mean, it was never solved, but anti-Semitism, obviously, Holocaust, horrible, we won the war, things are getting better, and we kind of set that aside. We're not as focused on that anymore. And you're saying this is something we just need to continue to be vigilant on. And you could say the same thing about civil rights. And there are many other things as well. But is that kind of what you're also thinking when you look at these results?
Absolutely. It shows that there has always been a need for ongoing education, ongoing awareness building, and you're absolutely correct. This is something which we could say about so many ills in our society, that we know that there are historical, long-standing hatreds or bigotries. And we need to educate about these issues, and we need to be, we need to call them out for what they are, and to be able to encourage people to speak up when they see incidents of, whether it's anti-Semitism, racism, sexism. There are many of these examples, as you say, and we perhaps were lulled into a sense of complacency for a period of time, thinking that all the ill will of this kind was going to stay buried under a rock. and that's not really the case.
This indicated nearly 1 out of every 4 Jews in the U.S. has been the subject of anti-Semitism over the past year. I'm reading that from a report. And again, tell us what form that takes. 1 out of every 4 Jews in the U.S. has been the subject of anti-Semitism. Do you agree with that? Do you feel like that's accurate? And what form does it take? And are we seeing that here in Middle Tennessee? Would that be something you could say about here in Middle Tennessee?
So interestingly enough, here in Middle Tennessee, we have a way of judging this, which is, so the organization that I lead, the Jewish Federation and Jewish Foundation of Nashville and Middle Tennessee, has an anti-Semitism reporting form, which we recently posted on our website and have publicized the fact that it exists. And overwhelmingly, the incidents of anti-Semitism that are being reported are coming from schools. They're coming from either parents or children who have their kids in school. Most often it's public school, which is where most kids are attending. And there'll be an incident. It either can be between 2 different students, or it can be an incident in a classroom and how did a teacher or an administrator respond to a given situation. And it's very unfortunate that here we are in 2021, we're almost into 2022, and yet there clearly is still this issue. And it's not limited only to public schools. There are other examples. Those unfortunately happen to be the most recent ones that are being brought to our attention.
And I just wonder, there's a lot to ask here. Okay, why again this is happening? I read something. We're seeing more from the left now because they're pro-Palestinian supporters. They blame American Jews for the Israeli government policies. Okay, so I read that. I don't know that that's what's going on in the public schools that you're talking about. You know, I just don't know. And I guess it's just this long-standing dislike of Jews. How that is happening. I mean, why do you think we are seeing that in public schools and this just doesn't go away? What? That's a hard question, but from your perspective, what's the answer?
So I believe, unfortunately, there's a lack of education, and it comes across as ignorance, and it also comes across as something which, if a child in school is going to make references to Adolf Hitler, or if the child in school is going to use a Hitler salute or use a swastika to deface the desk of a Jewish child, that is behavior which unfortunately has probably been learned either at home or has been learned elsewhere outside of school, and that child unfortunately brings that bias with him or her to the school. And so there's a need for education in the community on the level of the parents, in houses of worship, in the schools for the children themselves. And there's so many layers here of a need for education. And I believe, unfortunately, that there are too many ways in which youngsters come into the schools and they've already got this bias which has been essentially baked in before they even know it.
And that would be something that you could say about civil rights as well. I mean, I think that hits on it perfectly. It's already baked in. And so how do we get past that? What do we need to be doing? I guess talking about it, not thinking that we've moved on from it, acknowledging that it remains a problem. What do you think we do for a case where it's baked in and we're talking about this in elementary schools or, you know, in schools?
Absolutely. So when you see it in elementary schools, when you see it in middle schools, those are relatively younger people. I mean, I think that having the children, having their parents, having families learn about and understand why having an anti-Semitic expression or a symbol or an action is hurtful, is hateful, and is in fact not an appropriate response. I think that we as a country, we as a society need to remember that there is a certain element of a lack of education when somebody thinks, oh, it's okay to respond in this fashion. And a Nazi salute or a swastika, those are very hateful symbols. And I think getting to the point of educating people, both the youngsters, the children, as well as their parents and the community as a whole, about that and why that's an inappropriate way to respond, I think is really important.
So you watch this obviously very closely. Are you optimistic about where we're headed? Do you think we're headed in a good direction, or do you think in recent years we're headed in a very bad direction? Is this something we can stem? You know, where do you think we're going to be in 10 years, and how optimistic are you?
I would love to have that crystal ball and be able to tell you where we're going to be. I think this is going to require a lot of hard work. It's going to require building partnerships and having allies in this. This is not a problem that can be either solved by the Jewish community or that is solely the responsibility of the Jewish community. And where I get optimistic is the fact that when I have conversations with elected officials, business, civic leaders, academic leaders, they acknowledge, they recognize this problem. They, in fact, sometimes approach me and approach the Jewish Federation to say, this is something which is concerning to me. How can we work with you? How can we address this? So people who have that goodwill, who have the heart to say this is something that they want to help, address in our society, gives me hope. I don't think the path is going to be easy, and I don't think the path is going to go quickly. I believe that we're looking at an ongoing process, and we spoke about earlier, this is something that has to be a continuing educational effort, because we can never sort of rest on our laurels and say, okay, we're done, we've solved that problem, let's move on to something else.
That's right. All right, very interesting. All right, that sets the table for our discussion. Now we want to open up the phone lines and hear from you. Any comments, questions you have? Very interesting topic. There is the number 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. So we'll take a break, come back, continue our discussion right after this.